This is a response video to Stormcloudsgathering. Guys obviously got a pretty thought-provoking channel. Makes me think this isn't just like one guy doing a channel, but we'll get into that later. And we talked a lot about, what would happen next. And a lot of people are trying to argue about who gets to control the Capitol. And this image from the video is probably one of the telling images. What if there is no capital or the capital is irrelevant? And if the national capital or the capital becomes irrelevant, we might actually end up with something that's a lot like China. China has a strong central government, but they also have autonomous zones where some of those autonomous zones have more rights of being apart from the central government than most states in the United States have, of being separate from the federal government. Hong Kong is a Chinese autonomous zone. Taiwan is more or less entirely independent of mainland China. But when we look at the past in the United States, or we look at let's say the Roman Empire, because somebody's been making some comments in there about the Roman Empire. I would argue that the Roman Empire never came to an end. I would argue that the Roman Empire and the influence of the Catholic Church never ended. Obviously, there was some shrinkage from the south and the east that parallel the growth of Islam. But the Roman Empire never fully ended. It continued to exist in several different forms. The Catholic Church, the mafias, the Italian nobility as they consolidated control in Italy, even after Garibaldi's reunification of Italy. And the Italian diaspora, as Italians then spread throughout the world to the New World and in the United States, what went with them was a lot of things that were carried from the Roman Empire. There are some people who would argue that the United States is actually a continuation of the Roman Empire. So I don't think will America, the concept, be over? No, it won't. Never will be. It's etched in history. It will stay in history, and that's that. Here, one of the things, we get back to the autonomous zones. One of the things I support in the American Redoubt, for people who fit the belief system and demographics of who would want to be involved with this, I think it's an entirely valid situation of a bit of mobility of populations to go someplace where it's going to work for you, your ethnic group, your belief systems, your lifestyle, the economic system you choose to live with. I think there's going to be a greater difference between regions and states. The question is, would it be state by state? Would it be region by region? I personally see several states declaring independence from the nation. I see states splitting up. I see states, that's a different map. Here's some interesting stuff. Relationship between church and beer tweets. You're going to see demographic shift where people go, and I think you're going to see autonomous regions and regions which aren't really ruled by the federal government. Now the question would be, do we actually see something that's going to look like this again? I would say no, but I'm not going to say a strong no. And the reason is because the Confederates felt entirely patriotic toward the American Revolution. They just felt the time had come for the United States to be a little bit more separated. You have to also realize, though, that after the Civil War, for several decades, states' rights was a major issue. And although all of the states were in the Union, state governments were very different from each other. Now, what we're going to see, I personally think, is still common values that a lot of us are going to call American values. And there's probably going to be a federal government of one form or another that continues to operate in the entire U.S. map area. I think it would continue to function, but there's going to be areas which are just functionally a lot more sovereign. They're going to be a lot more sovereign than they were in the past. And it's not just going to be state by state. I think some states are going to split up. People are going to form their own governments. There's going to be a very complex checkered board of who controls what areas and what the actual freedom is going to be in those areas. I think what's going to happen is the highway system is going to eventually collapse from disuse because people aren't maintaining it. If the federal government does anything right, they will maintain the main superhighway system. And there is some talk that may be what they're going to attempt to do with a federalized police force that helps facilitate but also control and restrict certain types of interstate trade. You would still see a lot of trade along non-highway routes, but you're also going to see an increased number of checkpoints and differences from state to state on laws, regulations, and customs. I think what we're also going to see is we're going to see some states splitting up. Oregon has a population concentration along the I-5 corridor, which is right here. This area here is barely governed, okay? What a lot of people would consider being a center of Oregon is the city of Bend. That's the center of the map. Now, everybody who lives in Oregon considers Bend to be in the far east. Everything east of Bend, between Bend and Idaho, is just no man's land right here. You've got areas in northern California and southern Oregon where the actual border between the states means very little. These people are so far from the state capitals and the areas of state rule that they call themselves the state of Jefferson. And I think you're going to see a little bit more of that, where it's going to happen unofficially for a long time before anybody actually officially redraws the maps. And in these areas, you're going to be able to see very different, you're going to see very different forms of government, very different customs. And people are just going to end up going where it works for them. And a big issue is going to be maintaining the mobility to be where you want to be. But I think we're going to see a lot of people, yeah, there'll be some conflict, but you're going to see people going places. And that's what happened in the Great Depression. A lot of people during the Great Depression did migrate around the country. Now, during the more recent period of, let's say, a revolutionary period in the United States, from the late 60s to early 70s, we saw a pretty big migration of a lot of people who felt that the government was repressive in the Midwest, in Ohio, Northern Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Chicago, Pennsylvania. A lot of the young people left these areas, went to California. Okay, that was a lot of what populated California in the late 60s, early 70s. I think what's going to happen now with, let's say, the people who want their gun rights, there's going to find a place where they start to gather. And we don't know where those places will be. I would say we're probably going to talk about the American Redoubt for people that live in the western states. We're probably going to talk about Maine up here for the people who live in the east. I think we're going to talk a little bit about Alaska. Whether or not maybe some states do go out and out socialist. I mean, really officially socialist. And people should have the right to go to which state under which government they choose to live in, and with the rights, freedoms, and responsibilities and restrictions that they feel they're comfortable with and that they are making their own choices about. And I think that's what's really going to be happening as the government has less of an influence, and the government will be forced to accept the lifestyles of people who previously probably were much more under control. And people who would have been maybe rubbing the government the wrong way, and the government would clamp down on them. Now it's going to be a matter of they're going to go to enclaves and autonomous zones where they can actually live whatever lifestyle they have much more openly with less government restriction and oversight, because the government's not going to be able to do it. So what do I think is going to happen? I think we're going to see a lot of enclaves. I think people have a right to establish them. I think we're going to see autonomous zones within what had been the United States. And the United States will probably be less united. But the American dream is not going away anytime soon.